Welcome back to another episode of the IFC's Individuation podcast. I'm Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai. With me today, as always, the Chain Gang. I like to call them the Chain Gang. It sounds so appropriate for them. Lisa Hong, Dr. Lisa Hong, and Dr. Eric Tomlinson are here.
Hey, where's our three friends?
Go ahead, Dr. Eric. Say hello.
No. Oh, hello. Where are our three friends?
Who are you talking about?
Lisa knows.
Oh, our three friends. They're
playing. They're all gallivanting.
The puppets. Yes, they're somewhere next to me somewhere. They're over here.
I was just missing them is all.
Oh, you're missing them. Okay. I will prop them up in their usual position. Lisa keeps falling over, so I don't know how to hook her up.
She's tired.
Huh?
Lisa's tired. That's why she's falling over.
I think she was holding you afloat. Okay. There you go. There's your three friends.
Okay. Now I can call you the puppet master again.
Okay. Well, with that, I don't know where all this hostility is coming from. Microaggressions this afternoon. With that, we're going to start our podcast as always. So we're going to go into volume 2 of the collected works of Mary Louise von Franz, Archetypal Symbols in Fairy Tales, The Hero's Journey. So we're going to be talking about the hero. And in today's story, we're going to be talking about the three feathers. This is a Grimm's fairy tale. And so, Dr. Lisa, how are you today? And would you like to start us off today and read the story?
I'd be happy to. So this is the first story, page 5. The Three Feathers. Once upon a time, there was a king who had 3 sons. 2 of them were clever, but the third one did not talk very much. He was simple-minded, and the name they gave him was Simpleton. When the king became old and weak and contemplated his end, he did not know which of his sons should inherit the kingdom after him. And one day he said to them, "Go forth, and one of you who brings me the finest carpet shall be king after my death." So that there would be no dispute among them, he led them to the front of his castle, blew 3 feathers into the air, and said, "As they fly, so shall you go forth." One feather flew to the east, the other to the west, and the third feather flew straight ahead. It did not go far, but fell quickly to the ground. One brother followed the first feather to the right and the other to the left, and they laughed at the simpleton, who had to stand there where the third feather had fallen. The simpleton sat down and was sad. Suddenly, he noticed that there was a trap door just next to his feather. He lifted it up, found a stairway, and climbed down inside. Then he came to another door and knocked, whereupon he heard someone calling out from within. "Maiden green and small, hopping toad's puppy, hop hither and thither, quickly see who is outside." The door opened and he saw a big fat toad sitting there, surrounded by a large number of little toads. The fat toad asked what he wanted. The simpleton answered, "I would like the most beautiful and finest carpet." Then the fat toad called to the young toad, saying, "Maiden green and small, hopping toad's puppy, hop hither and thither, bring me the big box." The young toad brought the box, and the fat toad opened it, then gave the simpleton a carpet from inside that was so beautiful and so fine, the like of which could never have been woven in the world above. He thanked the toad and climbed back up. Now, the other 2 sons thought that their brother was so stupid, he certainly would not find anything to bring home. "Why should we spend a lot of effort looking for a special carpet?" they said. So they took some pieces of coarse cloth from the first shepherd woman they came to and took these back to the king. At the same time they returned home, the simpleton also arrived, bringing with him his beautiful carpet. When the king saw it, he was astonished and said, "It is only right that the kingdom should go to my youngest son." The 2 other sons gave their father no peace, however, saying that it would be impossible for the simpleton to become king. He lacked the understanding in all things. They asked the king, to declare another contest. The father acquiesced and said, "He who brings me the most beautiful ring shall inherit the kingdom." Again, he led the three brothers outside and blew three feathers into the air that they were to follow. Again, the simpleton followed his feather to the fat toad, who gave him a beautiful ring. The elder brothers made no effort and drove nails out of old wagon rings and brought these to the king. When the simpleton presented his golden bejeweled ring, the king said once again, "The kingdom belongs to him." The two eldest sons did not cease from tormenting the king until finally he declared a third contest, saying that he who would bring him home the most beautiful woman shall have the kingdom. Once again, he blew three feathers into the air, and they flew in the same directions as before. Without hesitating, the simpleton went back down to the fat toad and said, "I'm supposed to take home the most beautiful woman." "Yikes," said the toad. "The most beautiful woman? She's not here at the moment, but you shall nevertheless have her." The fat toad gave him a hollowed out carrot, to which were harnessed six little mice. The simpleton said very sadly, "What am I to do with this?" The toad answered, "Just put one of my little toads inside it." Then he grabbed one of them from the group and set it inside the yellow coach. The little toad was scarcely inside when it turned into a beautiful young lady, the carrot into a coach, and the six mice into horses. He kissed her, raced away with the horses, and brought her to the king. His brothers came along afterward. They had given no effort to find a beautiful woman, but simply brought along the first good peasant woman they had come upon. After looking at them, the king said, "After my death, the kingdom belongs to my youngest son." The two eldest sons deafened the king's ears all over again, yelling, "We cannot allow the simpleton to become king." They demanded that the choice should go to the brother whose woman could jump through a hoop that was hanging in the middle of the hall. They thought the peasant woman would manage much better than the delicate lady. The old king gave in to this as well. Then the two peasant women jumped through the hoop, but they were so plump they fell and broke their legs. Then the beautiful lady that the simpleton had brought home sprang to the hoop as lightly as a deer. After all this, the protest stopped. The simpleton received the crown, and he ruled wisely for a long time.
Oh, thank you, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the story of the three feathers. And as we left off with von Franz and the story of the anima, now what we are diving into is the hero. But we have to figure out who's the hero in the story. So the hero is many things. The hero could be the toad, as well as the simpleton. So that's the big question, von Franz states, that has so far remained unanswered is, if the fairy tales with all its characters is interpreted as an inner drama of a human being, who actually is this hero who experiences and suffers all the action in this drama? Light is shed on this question in those fairy tales that describe the initial situation of the hero before he sets off on his journey. In these scenes, we see his place within human wholeness. A good example of this is giving insight into our question is the Grimm's fairy tale, The Three Feathers, to which we now turn. In the story, our simpleton is our hero. The simplest of the brothers, the most naive of the brothers, ends up being the smartest of the brothers, or outwits them, as they would say in the old tale. He outwits his brothers because he is patient. He is not in a hurry. While the other two are chasing something, he is waiting for it to appear. So he is waiting for the magical process to take place. He is not chasing it. When you chase it, as we know, we become caught in the light of it. And so we get lost. We lose our way because it becomes such a shiny object. We're chasing the shine. We don't understand what the task is at hand. So The simpleton finds a trapdoor. Where does it go? It leads deep into the unconscious, to the world below. As Young says, as above, as below. We have a world below, and that world is deep within the unconscious. He goes into and finds a toad. This is not any toad, though. He says, on page 6, it says, the door opened and he saw a big, fat toad sitting there, surrounded by a large number of little toads. The fat toad asked what he wanted. The simpleton answered, I would like the most beautiful and finest carpet. Then the fat toad called to a young toad, saying, maiden green, small hopping toad's puppy, hop hither and thither, bring me the big box. So the toad is a magical toad. It's a magical creature. It has a magic box. And within the magic box appears the treasure. But the toad has to say a spell. Maiden green and small hopping toad's puppy, hopping hither and thither, bring me the big box. As he is saying the spell, that is being created. So the magic is being created. A young toad brought the box back. The fat toad opened it and then gave the simpleton a carpet from inside. That was so beautiful, so fine, the like of which could never been woven in the world above. So it doesn't exist in the world above, right? This is from deep within the unconscious. And he thanked the toad and climbed back up. So the first task is to find the finest carpet. The father sent them to find the finest carpet. Finest carpets are hard to come by, mythologically. They were made by hand. They were made with the finest of silk. So they were delicate. Plus, they had to tell a story. Carpets of those days, they tell a story. So he has to go get a carpet, but the carpet symbolizes a story. So he has to go create a story and bring it back. That's what he gets. So the first thing that he gives. The father tells him he won, but then the two sons argue and they force his hand and he has to go out again. But now he's found his way into where the treasure is buried. It's with the toad, with the magical toad, with the magical box. When the father asks him to bring the finest, most beautiful woman, the toad says, yipes, she is not here at the moment, but you shall have her nevertheless. The fat toad gave him a hollowed out carrot to which were harnessed 6 little mice. The simpleton said very sadly, what am I to do with this? The toad answered, just put one of my little toads inside of it. Then he grabbed one of them from the group and set it inside the yellow coach. The little toad was scarcely inside when it turned into a beautiful young lady, the carrot into a coach, and the 6 mice into horses. He kissed her and raced away with the horses and brought her to the king. So this time, instead of the Toad being a prince. She's a princess. And she appears. So these magical creatures who create an unbelievable moment, because the simpleton wasn't going to be able to do this task. That's why he's our hero. His name is Simpleton. He's very, very simple. The story also tells us that you don't have to be sophisticated to be a hero. That being a hero is simple. You stick to your road. So, in the story, the hero is the simplest of the group. He's less manipulative, he's less deceitful, he's honest, and he's straightforward.
I like that aspect of the story where the simpleton, he goes with intention and in focus. He goes not out of direct forcing a result. He goes with some openness to see what it is around him. And that's where he actually happens to fall upon seeing this trapdoor anyways. And even when he comes across things that he doesn't understand, he asks more questions. What am I to do with this? And he continues to follow feelings and intuition instead of saying, give me this. And that's not what I asked. I didn't ask for a carrot, you know. And then he continues. He says, what am I to do with this? How does this work? And he follows without force. And the simpleton being more present, I guess, in no matter what situation he may be in. Mm-hmm.
That's the word I was going to use too, Lisa, is he's not trying to create his own journey, just like you're talking about. Mm-hmm. He's following the energy of what he's facing in his every present moment and going with it rather than trying to create something anew. Mm-hmm. I also like the fact that, you know, I kind of like frogs. A lot of, I mean, they're, let's face it, they're not on the top 10 list of pets for people and in general. And yet, where do we see them written about more often than not in literature? It's usually fairy tales, because there's a power that they have. They have the, you know, all we have to do is look in real life. There are frogs that have the power to kill with the substances on their back, the poisons and toxins on their back. There are people who use that, cultures that use that toxin to provide food and bring them life. There are other frogs that provide chemicals that allow a person to go into journeys, into mental journeys that they would never be able to go to otherwise. So frogs are very interesting in life, and we don't give them credit, but fairy tales do. And I like that. I like that about fairy tales.
Frogs can also live in both worlds, the surface world and go into the water and go and they're more like maybe like a fairy. You follow the frog to the unconscious, to the depths, to another passage.
That's a good point. They exist in more than one dimension. Mm-hmm.
So when Franz talks about the quaternity here, She says that the hero belongs initially to a group of four. He himself is the fourth, the one despised and regarded as the most backward, since he does not understand all things. This initially tattered a father or a mother with 3 sons or with 3 daughters is a very common fairy tale motif. The quaternity in itself indicates a wholeness complete within itself, to which nothing can be added. As we discussed above, in relation to the self, the quaternity indicates the secret center and the unconscious. This is almost always represented as a mandala and frequently appears as a circle divided into 4 parts. So if we look at the fairy tale situation in terms of pattern, a quartered circle, the hero, like the anima, is an image of one particular psychic function, one part of the higher psychic wholeness. So the hero, like the anima, is an image of one particular psychic function. One can ask, he says, how appropriate is such a perspective? Jung found that when an unconscious image appears, it does not necessarily concern the overtly represented object, but rather, at least as much, if not primal, symbolizes subjective parts of the psyche. In case of the literary work, this would be parts of the soul of the poet or writer. For fairy tales, the kind of psychological interpretation is not immediately evident because their characters, such as the hero, are relatively autonomous, independent, and rounded out. They are not clearly recognizable as part of a system. On the other hand, they do not exhibit the changeability and shifting quality of the dream figures. The exposition in many fairy tales where the hero initially belongs to a group of 4 lends support to our interpretation that these figures represent parts of the psyche. If we were to waive the idea that group of figures is part of a whole being, then the story distinguishes into a multiplicity of characters and actions that could make some degree of sense, but from which no real unifying meaning can be recognized. So when we look at the 4 aspects of the psyche, so we're always looking at unity. The 4 represents unity of psyche. So the other 3 cannot operate without the unity of the simpleton. The simpleton is the part, the heroic part of the group. There's a selfish part. There's a needy part, and there's a giving part. And the hero represents the part that completes the group. Each piece represents a piece of psychological activity within you. There's the heroic part, the part that wants to save people, help. There's the greedy part. Can I make money off this? There's the ambitious part. Can I become powerful because of this? And then there's just the giving part. Why don't you just give? This is how, when we think of fairy tales and we think of the hero is that part of you that overcomes the other parts. It is the transformative aspect of self. The 4 represents self. Without the hero, you don't have self. The representation is that you have to be greater than what you think you are, or who you are, or where you come from, or what you do in the world. You have to overcome that idea, because if your worth is bogged down by what you do or how you do it, and you can't do it, or you can't be that object anymore, then your life falls apart. The transformative aspect of our life is that we overcome what we think we are, or what people say we are. You know, we overcome the idea of who we think we are. We have to be able to transform that. And the only way to do that is through the hero. So the hero goes through phases as they go through the journey. The first phase is they're lost. They have to go on a journey. They don't know why. They're just set on a task. It seems impossible at first. Always seems impossible. Then they have to meet themselves. And when the hero goes into the unconscious and finds a toad, and you're right, Eric, it is mythologically, it's a transformative. The toad is transformative because it has those properties, because it has skin that can be poisonous. It has skin that can be a toxin. It has skin that could make you hallucinate. It has venom that could kill you. But it's also a listening device for pollution in the water.
Very much so.
So it was an old way of seeing if the water was polluted, if it was drinkable or not. So it represents nature at its core.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's a magical creature, because it represents so many aspects of nature. And Lisa, the other part where it also you brought in, which it both lives in the spirit world as well as in the upper world. It lives in the shadows of the spirit world because it lives in the unconscious. It lives under the water, just as you said. And it lives on top, where it lives with the world we think we perceive, touch that we talk about, the world above. It's not that we don't talk about the world below. Is that our brain can't understand how it works. Our brain loses way perspective. It's like, well, that happens when I'm not here. No, you're always somewhere. But you are correct. You are not at this point in time. But you're never at this point in time. It's elusive. What else did we get from the story that you liked?
Just, well, today, I mean, I was struck this morning watching segments of a couple of my favorite sports shows, and they were commemorating the life and death of Kobe Bryant, who is one of my top players of all time. And everyone that talked about him in a way that you were talking about a few minutes ago, about how they helped them to be transformed in ways that they never thought they could be, because he was always trying to be more than what he thought he could be, to rise above the limitations and become something that even he didn't believe he could become. And he imparted that idea to a lot of fellow players and friends. And and even when you evolve into something more, even at that point, you say to yourself, I can become more than this. So he never stopped trying to improve himself. He spoke 3 or 4 languages fluently. I don't think he had a college degree. He Within a few years after his retirement, he wins an Oscar, for Christ's sake. I mean, it's unbelievable. This guy was always trying to evolve as a human being. And here's this simpleton, and he's evolving into something that not only his family didn't believe he could evolve into, but I'm sure he didn't either. And yet, by following the pattern of his true self, he was able to become something greater than he ever thought. So that's what strikes me from the story.
And with your last statement there, I would continue that saying the simpleton was not begrudged by the doubts of his brothers. He never said, "Oh, I'm not capable." He's so simple that he just did his thing. he wasn't deterred by doubt. He wasn't deterred by other oppressive voices. He followed his own presence, feeling, intuition, instincts, and curiosities, and openness, and found other gateways that reaped rewards for him.
And we see ourselves in him,
Mm-hmm.
because he wasn't the prince of the land.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And conversely, his siblings were so engrossed in their simple brother that they did not complete the task to the intention that the father had put forth. They did not make any effort each time. They just took shortcuts because they were so engrossed by what the other simpleton brother would produce that they produced mediocre results, which were close to no result.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They thought the hero was a loser.
Right. And they were so concerned about other things and the other person that they were closed to themselves and what was around them, and maybe there were possibilities laying around them and people they could have met or things that they could have followed that were right in front of them if they were just not concerned about their simple brother, or not concerned about the finish, but more intent with a different thought or feeling.
I think that their lack of concern for the younger brothers was their downfall. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways. I think that their dismissal of him and his ability caused their own loss. To get back to the representation of the given psychic condition by 4 basic psychological functions, Jung saw this. He says, this is from von Franz on page 9. She goes, like the 4 seasons and the 4 quarters of heaven, the 4 elements are a quaternity, system of orientation, which always expresses as a wholeness. The orientation system of consciousness has 4 aspects, which corresponds to 4 empirical functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. The quaternity is the archetypal arrangement. The quaternity is an archetype of almost universal occurrence, she says. It forms the logical basis of any whole judgment. If one wishes to pass such a judgment, they have to look at the 4 aspects, which is thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. She says it must have this 4-fold aspect. For instance, if you want to describe the horizon as a whole, you name the 4 quarters of heaven. There are 4 elements, 4 prime qualities, 4 colors, 4 castes, 4 ways of spiritual development in Buddhism. So too, there are 4 aspects of psychological orientation: beyond which nothing fundamental remains to be said. The ideal of completeness is the circle or a sphere, but its a natural minimal division is a quaternity. Of the four functions, there is one that is most used, and therefore the one that is most developed and differentiated. So the simpleton is the least used, and in this case, the most effective. The one that is most developed and differentiated. With this dominant function, the individual adapts to the objective world. It determines the psychological typology of the person, whereas the two auxiliary functions are not in opposition to the main function, but can even complement it. The four function is a diametrically opposed to the main function. For example, feeling is the fourth function when the thinking is dominant. The fourth function can become a problem for the individual because it lives at the border to the unconscious, or can even persist in the unconscious and negate all conscious values acquired by the dominant function. So the fourth is the feeling function. And she talks about the feeling function as living close to the unconscious, because you're not really conscious of where the feeling function is coming from. The feeling function is like the thinking function. I have a feeling about this. I have a very strong feeling. These are the statements that are made. I have a very strong feeling as to what I want to do. Part of it lives in the conscious world. The main part of it lives in the unconscious. It comes from the depth. Why do you want to do that? I have a feeling, which is not an exact definition of why you want to do that, but it's the feeling. In this case, the hero is the feeling function and is able to overcome the thinking function, right? The sensing function and the intuitive function. So the four is an archetypal pattern, according to Jung. This is basic part of the psychic condition. And thus we have stuff like the Myers-Briggs and other indices that they use from Jungian theories based on the four functions. Any thoughts on our simpleton, our four functions, our three feathers?
The four functions are just complete to me. I mean, it just represents a completeness to me. You know, earth, wind, fire, water, north, south, east, west. It just encompasses everything.
Well, it's a pattern, right?
Yeah.
It's a repetitive pattern. That's why it looks like it encompasses everything.
Yeah. Well, it gives you that feeling.
Mm.
I was thinking another, I don't know, hero but another character in this fairy tale is the king. The king followed his intuition. He just said, I'm going to give you all a chance. I'm going to give it to you 4 times. And he kept going, giving them all an equal chance and several times. And I'm going to continue to do what I say. You know, it goes to the younger son. It goes to the youngest son. And okay, we'll try again. It goes to the youngest son. And he kept following his intuition of how he should leave his kingdom.
That's a really good point. I didn't stop to think about, Lisa, the king being confident of the outcome. He wouldn't have kept giving chance after chance after chance if he didn't have some level of confidence in the outcome. It's really a good point.
So it's always the intuition. That's the intuitive aspect of it. I know the outcome is always I know that I'm going to get snake eyes every time I roll these dice. I'm going to roll them 4 times. Every time it's going to come out snake eyes. I know it's going to happen. Right? This is part of what intuition tunes into destiny. Intuition doesn't predict destiny. It tunes in. It's like a radio wave. And suddenly intuition picks it up and it's like, oh, it's going to end this way. I know it's going to end this way with destiny, right? This is destiny's course is that what destiny does is basically it ties a knot and then moves on and ties another knot, moves on. So it looks like an ending, but it's actually a beginning to something else. So destiny is very tricky that way.
It's an important distinction, Dr. Lahab. That's a good point.
So with destiny, I mean, with everything else, destiny is always calling because it always has another knot to tie. So the destiny was always the simpleton was going to be their king. That was destiny. But until destiny ties all the knots, you don't see it. But when the destiny ties all the knots, then it's like, oh yeah, that was predictable. We say things like, oh, that's predictable. I could have saw that coming a mile away. No, you couldn't. Now you can. Now the road is open. Now that's what you see. Any other thoughts on today's story? The Three Feathers. It was a good story. I like the story. So we will continue with Mary Louise von Franz's Archetypal Symbols and Fairy Tales, The Hero's Journey on the IFC's Individuation podcast. And we are working towards our transforming our name into Time of the Archetype from the IFC's Individuation podcast. So if you join us in a couple of weeks, we'll probably be under Time of the Archetype, formerly known as the IFC's Individuation podcast, which seems like cumbersome, but in Time of the Archetype seems a little less cumbersome. So with that, I am Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai.
Can I make one last point?
Yes. Yeah, please.
I just wanted to tell everyone that I am not afraid.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We always we always take our affirmations as we are not afraid. But before we go, we'd like to let you know that you could reach us at the Institute for Conflict, one word, at gmail.com if you have comments or commentary or questions for us. We'd be happy to answer your questions. With that, I am Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai, and this is the IFC's Individuation podcast. And from the IFC, we are not afraid. Lisa?
We are not afraid.
We are not afraid.
We are not afraid. And we will see you next week on the IFC's Individuation podcast, soon to be Time of the Archetype.